imagine for a second that the greatest debut album, right, and the greatest sophomore album of all time were dropped on the exact calendar day.
Right.
And, like, not just the same day, but the exact same day that the recording studio itself was invented.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. You're basically looking at the cultural equivalent of, someone handing you a guitar for the very first time in human history.
Yeah.
And you just immediately, casually play Stairway to Heaven and then follow it directly up with Bohemian Rhapsody.
Without any practice.
With zero practice.
Yeah.
And that is essentially the story of the emergence of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
It really is. I mean, it forces us to completely reevaluate how we view human progress, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because we have this entrenched modern bias that, cultural evolution is this slow, iterative, almost Darwinian crawl.
Right. Like, we assume early art has to be primitive.
Exactly. But then you look at the 8th century BC, the Greeks take the Phoenician consonant system, they retrofit it with vowels to create the first true phonetic alphabet, and then almost instantaneously, out of the historical dark, we have these two towering literary masterpieces just fully formed.
It's mind-blowing.
They aren't just early attempts at storytelling, They are arguably the apex of the medium. They act as the absolute bedrock for all of Western literature.
Well, welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today we are looking at a massive stack of historical texts, linguistic analyses, modern literary critiques, and sociological frameworks to uncover the true, intricate story of Homer's The Odyssey. And I want to say, if you are listening to this right now, as someone navigating the absolute sea of modern information overload, doom scrolling on your phone, you are the ultimate target audience for this.
Absolutely.
Because our mission today is to move past the surface level tropes. I mean, we all know the broad strokes, right?
Sure.
The wooden horse, the guy with one eye, the really long boat ride.
The highlight reel.
Right, the highlight reel. But we are bypassing all of that today. We're diving into how a 3,000-year-old epic about a guy just trying to get back to his farm operates as this terrifying psychological thriller about the collapse of societal order.
Mm-hmm.
It's this deep exploration of the clash between raw, brute force and intellectual craft. And frankly, I think it might hold the ultimate philosophical cure for our modern era of overthinking, optimization fatigue and endless doom scrolling.
Which is exactly why we have to ground this in its actual historical weight.
Right.
Because we aren't dealing with a fantasy novel meant to just entertain ancient aristocrats, right? We're dealing with the distillation of thousands of years of Indo-European oral history.
Wow, thousands.
Oh, yeah. If you look at the linguistic strata of Homer's Greek and you compare the thematic structures to the Vedic epic tradition.
Like the Mahabharata.
Exactly, like the Mahabharata. You can trace these moral architectures all the way back to the steppe peoples of Central Asia.
That is wild.
So what you are holding when you read the Odyssey is millennia of human experience, of trial and error regarding how a society actually survives, suddenly frozen in amber by the invention of writing.
Okay, I want to push on that idea of it being frozen in amber for a second.
Sure.
Specifically, this transition from the oral world to the written world. Because the authorship of these texts is still, like, one of the most contentious debates in classical studies, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's fiercely debated.
The ancient Greeks universally attributed both works to Homer, who is traditionally depicted as a blind bard. But looking at the structural differences between the two epics, I mean, I struggle to see how the visceral, hyper-violent, immediate world of the Iliad comes from the exact same brain as the much more sprawling, domestic, and frankly, psychologically layered world of the Odyssey.
And that tension that you're feeling, that is exactly what birthed the Homeric question in modern scholarship.
Okay.
You have the analysts who argue these are a patchwork of different lays stitched together by various editors over centuries.
Like a committee of writers.
Basically, yeah. And then you have the Unitarians who argue for a single masterful architect. But if we look at the traditional ancient narrative, it actually offers a really compelling psychological arc for a single creator.
How so?
Well, the theory is that the Iliad is the product of a younger man, right? Someone heavily embedded in the martial culture, totally obsessed with the absolute limits of human mortality on the battlefield.
Right, the fire of youth.
Exactly. Then, decades later, in the twilight of his life, that same poet pens the Odyssey The fire of youth has cooled down.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the focus shifts from how a man dies gloriously to how a man manages to live, how he reintegrates into peacetime, how he relates to women, and how he faces the mundane but, profound struggles of domesticity.
So it's basically the ancient equivalent of a director making a gritty war movie in his 20s and then a nuanced family drama in his 60s.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
But what about the blindness? Because within the Odyssey itself, specifically in Book 8, when we meet the Phaeacians, there's a character named Demodocus.
Yes, the bard.
Right. He is a celebrated, blind, epic bard who sings the tales of Troy to the court. It feels incredibly meta.
It does.
It's almost like a Renaissance painter subtly brushing his own portrait into the background of a massive cathedral fresco, Is this Homer basically winking at the audience, telling us who he is?
The ancient critics certainly read it that way, and primarily because it aligned with their metaphysical understanding of sensory deprivation.
What do you mean?
So the Greek conceptualization was that the gods operated on a principle of compensation.
Okay.
If they robbed a man of his physical sight, they balanced the scales by granting him inner sight.
Oh, like a deeper wisdom.
Exactly, a deeper, almost prophetic vision into the mysteries of human suffering and the architecture of the cosmos. Demodocus, and by extension Homer, isn't just an entertainer. The blind bard is a conduit.
A conduit. I like that.
Yeah.
But let's look at the mechanics of that conduit role, because this blew my mind. When we didn't have Google Maps, we just effortlessly memorized the streets of our cities, right?
Right, you just knew how to get around.
Exactly. And when humanity didn't have writing, they memorized the entire moral code of the universe in the form of epic poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, Milman Parry's fieldwork in the 1930s proved that these ancient poets were using the dactylic hexameter meter as a sort of cognitive scaffolding to remember tens of thousands of lines.
It wasn't just rote memorization.
Right. But my question for you is, did the invention of the alphabet actually damage our cognitive capacity? Like, did the act of writing down the Odyssey essentially make us forget how to hold a universe in our heads?
I mean, it absolutely triggered a massive cognitive atrophy.
Really?
No, without a doubt. You have to understand that in a primary oral culture, the brain is optimized for high-fidelity retention. The rhythm, the repeated epithets like swift-footed Achilles or gray-eyed Athena.
Right, they repeat those constantly.
They do, and they aren't just poetic flourishes. They are literal mnemonic software.
Wow.
The poet in an oral society is the living, breathing moral database of that culture. They hold the laws, the genealogies, the proper ways to sacrifice to the gods, the social contracts.
So they are the hard drive.
Exactly. But once you introduce a written paradigm, you externalize that database.
You essentially outsource your brain to a piece of papyrus.
Precisely. And Plato actually warns about this centuries later in the Phaedrus.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he argued that writing would implant forgetfulness in our souls because we would rely on external marks rather than our internal capacity.
That sounds exactly like what people say about smartphones today.
It's the exact same argument. And he was right. I mean, writing gave us the ability to build complex mathematics, codified law, and abstract philosophy, but it completely eradicated the oral matrix of the ancient brain.
Wow.
Homer represents the exact singularity point. His work is the final, magnificent echo of that lost cognitive world, captured just as the door closed on it forever.
Which is just the perfect framework for understanding the narrative of the Odyssey itself, because the overarching theme of this epic is what happens when a society's moral center, its living database of order, goes missing.
Yes, the vacuum of leadership.
Right, we have to look at the vacuum left behind. So, contextually for you listening, we're dealing with the aftermath of the late Bronze Age collapse. In the timeline of the story, it's been 20 years since Odysseus left his island of Ithaca.
A long time.
10 years fighting the Trojan War, and then 10 years completely off the grid, totally presumed dead. And Homer doesn't start the story with our hero. He starts with the rot back home.
And that structural choice is brilliant. We don't even see Odysseus for the first 4 books.
Which is crazy for a story named after him.
Right. We are forced to sit in this suffocating, claustrophobic environment of Ithaca with his 20-year-old son, Telemachus.
Right.
Telemachus was an infant when his father left. He has absolutely no memory of the patriarch. Homer is essentially simulating the societal decay that occurs when the apex pillar of order is removed.
And that decay takes the form of 108 suitors.
The suitors, yes.
These are the young, aristocratic elite from all the surrounding islands who have essentially staged a slow-motion home invasion.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, they want to marry Penelope, Odysseus' wife,
Yeah.
and take over the estate. But they aren't just bad house guests. They are systematically liquidating Odysseus' wealth.
They're bleeding him dry.
Yeah, they are slaughtering his cattle, they're drinking his wine stores, they're sleeping with his servant staff, and they are openly plotting to murder Telemachus.
We really have to look past the surface rudeness here and examine the institutional threat they pose. The suitors are an embodiment of entropy.
Entropy, okay.
In the ancient Greek worldview, the oikos, the household, is the foundational unit of civilization. The suitors are introduced to show us the primordial soup of barbarism that bubbles up when the rule of law collapses.
They're just purely chaotic.
Exactly. And Homer specifically marks them as godless. They refuse to offer the proper sacrifices, and they violate the sacred laws of hospitality, Xania, which was the absolute bedrock of Mediterranean survival.
But let's look at their actual motivation for a second. Penelope is, at this point in the timeline, likely in her late 30s or early 40s.
Right.
You have 108 powerful men in their physical prime who could presumably marry any young heiress in the region. Their obsession with her seems mathematically disproportionate to just wanting a wife.
This is where we can apply the sociological framework of René Girard, specifically his concept of mimetic desire.
Mimetic desire. So wanting what others want.
Exactly. Girard argued that human beings don't desire objects autonomously. We desire what others desire, or we desire objects that will confer the status of someone we envy.
Oh, I see.
The suitors don't inherently want Penelope just as a person. They want the socio-political capital she represents.
Because Odysseus is the alpha.
He is the ultimate alpha. He's the master tactician, the victor of Troy. If you take his wife, you don't just get a wealthy estate. You undergo a corporate hostile takeover of his mythology. You usurp his identity.
Right, you get to claim you are the new apex predator without ever having to actually bleed on the beaches of Troy.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate stolen valor. And Telemachus is completely paralyzed by this. He is trapped in this state of arrested development until the goddess Athena intervenes.
She has to push him.
Yeah, she essentially acts as the catalyst for his delayed rite of passage, telling him to leave Ithaca and seek news of his father from the other surviving Greek warlords, specifically Nestor and Menelaus.
And Athena's intervention here highlights that the internal mechanisms of justice on Ithaca have completely failed.
Right, the assembly won't do anything.
The assembly of elders is totally intimidated by the suitors. Athena forces Telemachus out into the wider world so he can see what a functioning post-war order actually looks like. But she also uses the terrifying precedent of Agamemnon as a psychological cattle prod to get him moving.
I am so glad you brought up Agamemnon, because his shadow hangs over the entirety of the Odyssey.
It really does.
For those who don't know, Agamemnon was the commander-in-chief of the Greek forces. He comes home victorious, only to be immediately butchered in his own bathtub by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus.
Just a brutal homecoming.
Brutal. It establishes this incredibly high-stakes tension for the whole epic. Even if Odysseus survives the ocean, the ultimate danger might actually be walking through his own front door.
And it underscores the fragility of the oikos, the household. The text notes that Agamemnon actually left a bard at home to serve as a moral compass for his wife while he was at war.
Wait, really? A bard?
Yes, and Aegisthus, the lover, had to kidnap and exile that bard to a desert island before he could successfully seduce Clytemnestra.
Wow, I completely missed that detail.
It's a literal representation of what happens when the cultural memory is removed. The moral architecture simply collapses. Athena ensures Telemachus knows this story because she is preparing him for the grim reality that restoring order might require absolute lethal violence.
Which makes Telemachus' journey to Sparta so incredibly tense, because he goes to the court of Menelaus for information, and he ends up sitting across the table from Helen of Troy. I want us to really think about the sheer mind-bending awkwardness of this scenario. Helen is the literal catalyst for the 10-year meat grinder that killed Telemachus' entire generation of fathers.
She started the whole thing.
Yeah. And now she is just sitting in a palatial dining room in Sparta, pouring wine for her original husband, as if the destruction of an entire civilization was just like a wild semester abroad.
The portrayal of Helen here is a masterclass in psychological complexity. Because when the conversation turns to the war and the men start weeping over their lost comrades, Helen doesn't offer a traditional apology.
No, she does something way crazier.
She utilizes a pharmacon, a drug she acquired from Egypt, and she just slips it into the communal wine bowl.
Which is insane.
Homer tells us this drug banishes all pain and anger, to the point where if a man's own family was slaughtered right in front of him, he wouldn't shed a single tear.
It is literal chemical gaslighting.
Yes.
You're grabbing coffee with a woman who ruined your family. She realizes you're getting upset, so she literally drugs your drink to forcibly regulate your emotions.
It is a profound demonstration of her power. Helen represents a highly refined, aristocratic, and manipulative danger that contrasts sharply with the brute, unrefined chaos of the suitors back on Ithaca.
Right.
When she addresses her own role in the war, she refers to herself as Canopus, which translates roughly to a shameless hound or dog-faced.
She calls herself that.
Yes, she preemptively wingmanizes her own guilt. By leaning into the vilification, by admitting she was the architect of their misery, she completely disarms any criticism Telemachus or Menelaus might leverage against her. She controls the narrative reality of the room just as effectively as her drug controls their neurochemistry.
That is terrifying. So we have the son navigating these complex political and psychological minefields, trying to learn how to be a force of order. And then finally, in Book 5, Homer cuts to the main event. We are finally introduced to the legendary Odysseus.
The man himself.
And the subversion of expectations here is staggering. We expect to see a tactical genius building weapons or, I don't know, a warrior training on the beach.
Right, you expect an action hero.
Instead, we find him sitting alone on a rocky beach on the island of Ogygia, staring out at the horizon, openly sobbing.
It is one of the most vulnerable introductions of a hero in all of Western literature. He is entirely stripped of his agency.
Completely.
He has been stranded on this island with the divine nymph Calypso for 8 years. 8 years. He has lost his fleet, his wealth, and his men to a succession of monsters and the wrath of the sea god Poseidon. He is essentially a prisoner of an incredibly comfortable, sexually satiating, but entirely static existence.
And let's look at what Calypso is actually offering him here, because from a modern biological standpoint, his rejection of her makes absolutely no sense.
None at all.
We are driven by an evolutionary imperative to maximize pleasure, minimize pain, and extend our lifespan. Calypso is offering him the ultimate hack to that biological system. She offers him literal immortality and eternal youth. She basically says, stay here, be my lover, never age, never die, and never suffer again. Just forget about your rocky, impoverished island and your aging mortal wife. And he turns it down. He chooses suffering and mortality over eternal paradise. Why?
Because to accept paradise is to accept the annihilation of his identity. To understand this, we have to look at the epithets that construct who he is in the poem. He is Polytropos, the man of many turns, the crafty one.
Right.
He is Polymedes, the man of deep counsel. And crucially, he is Polytlus, the man who has endured much. His entire ego, his complete psychological architecture, is forged in the friction of the world.
So without the friction, there is no fire.
Exactly. Well, or rather, I should say it's more definitive than that. It's not just about needing a challenge. It's about telos.
Telos.
Yes, the philosophical concept of ultimate purpose. If Odysseus accepts immortality on an isolated island, he ceases to interact with the human sphere. He can no longer be a father, a king, or a tactician. He becomes a museum exhibit of himself.
Oh, wow. That's a tragic way to look at immortality.
It is, and we see this threat earlier in his retrospective timeline with the Lotus Eater. The Lotus Eaters weren't violent monsters. They were essentially ancient narcotics dealers.
Right.
They offered a flower that neurologically severed a sailor's desire for Nostos the return home. Calypso is just a divine, sophisticated version of the Lotus Eaters. She is the temptation of stasis.
So to preserve his actual identity, he has to choose the pain of the mortal world.
Yes.
So Hermes delivers the eviction notice from Zeus, telling Calypso she has to let him go.
Yeah.
But I love that she doesn't just give him a magical ship. She points to the forest, hands him a bronze axe, and makes him fell the trees, shape the timbers, and build his own raft from scratch.
He has to work for it.
Yeah, and the moment he gets that raft out onto the open ocean, Poseidon spots him and unleashes a catastrophic hurricane, smashing the raft to splinters.
And that confrontation on the water, that is the macro theme of the entire epic, perfectly encapsulating.
Really, just that one storm.
Yes. It is the binary clash between the ancient Greek concepts of order and chaos, or craft versus force. Odysseus, building that raft, using tools and geometry, aligns him with Athena.
Right, the goddess of wisdom.
Exactly. Athena is the patron of civilization, of defensive warfare, of strategy, and of domestic technology like the loom. Poseidon is the absolute antithesis of that. He is the tectonic plate shifting, he is the tsunami, he is the raw, unthinking brute force of nature. Odysseus is trying to use the technology of the intellect to survive a universe that is fundamentally hostile and chaotic.
And it almost kills him. He has to strip off the divine, heavy clothing Calypso gave him just to avoid drowning. He washes up on the shores of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, completely stripped of his armor, his wealth, and his men.
He has absolutely nothing.
He is a naked, sulcate, half-dead animal hiding under an olive bush. And this leads to arguably one of his greatest tactical victories, which requires no weapons at all. His encounter with Princess Nausicaa on the beach.
It's a staggering display of rhetorical mastery. I mean, put yourself in that scenario.
Okay.
A group of young aristocratic women are washing clothes by a river. Suddenly, a battered, naked, wild-eyed man emerges from the brush. The natural human reaction is terror, and indeed, all her handmaidens flee.
I would run too.
Exactly. Now, if Odysseus rushes forward to clasp Nausicaa's knees in the traditional gesture of supplication, she might perceive it as an assault. But if he stays hidden, he starves. He has to calculate the exact psychological distance and the precise vocabulary required to de-escalate the situation and win her over.
And he does it flawlessly. He steps out, covers himself with a leafy branch, and hits her with the most calculated high-status flattery imaginable.
It's brilliant.
He compares her to a young palm tree he once saw growing beside the altar of Apollo at Delos. In one sentence, he compliments her beauty, establishes that he is a pious man who visits sacred religious sites, and subtly communicates that he is of high social standing. He uses sheer linguistic craft to turn a potential threat response into an invitation to the palace.
And once he is in the palace, securing the hospitality of King Alcinous and Queen Arete, we see another vital piece of his psychological evolution.
What happens?
Well, they throw a feast for him, still not knowing his true identity, and they bring out their blind bard, Demodocus. Odysseus intentionally requests that the bard sing the story of the Trojan horse.
Now, I have always found this moment so perplexing. We all know the trope of the Trojan horse. It was his crowning achievement.
His masterpiece.
Right. He designed the mechanism that allowed the Greeks to bypass the unbreakable walls of Troy, sneak in, and slaughter the city in its sleep. But when the bard sings the song, Odysseus doesn't swell with pride. He breaks down crying.
He does.
And Homer uses this incredibly specific, frankly, disturbing simile. He says Odysseus wept, quote, the way a woman weeps, falling to embrace her beloved husband who has died defending his city, while the enemy beats her back and shoulders with spears, leading her away into slavery.
It's a haunting image.
It is. Why is the architect of this genocide weeping like the victim of it?
Because the intervening 10 years of suffering have totally shattered his parochial warrior caste worldview. If you look at the heroes of the Iliad, like Achilles or Ajax, they operate on a very localized empathy.
Meaning they only care about their own guys.
Exactly. They care about their own glory and their own immediate comrades. But Odysseus has been stripped of everything. He has experienced the absolute vulnerability of being a victim of larger, uncontrollable forces. By comparing his tears to the tears of a Trojan widow, the very widows he created, Homer is illustrating the birth of universal human empathy.
Oh, wow.
Odysseus suddenly recognizes the cosmic tragedy of war, independent of which side you are on.
That structural breakdown is what prompts the king to finally demand his name. And this kicks off the famous flashback sequence spanning books 9 through 12.
The stories everyone knows.
Yeah, and the crown jewel of this sequence is, of course, the Cyclops episode. Now, assuming we all know the mechanics of how he escapes blinding Polyphemus and hiding under the sheep, I want to focus on why the Cyclops is such an offensive creature to the Greek mind. It's not just that he has one eye and eats people, right? It's a complete violation of their societal operating system.
Exactly. We have to look at the function of xenia, or guest host hospitality. The Mediterranean is an incredibly hostile geography.
Very dangerous.
Right. If you are sailing for trade or war, you are entirely reliant on the goodwill of strangers when you run out of fresh water or get blown off course. Zeus himself was the patron god of strangers and suppliants. Xenia wasn't just good manners, it was the evolutionary survival mechanism of ancient maritime culture.
So when the Cyclops traps them in the cave and starts eating the crew raw, dashing their brains on the rocks, he isn't just acting like a monster, he is functionally destroying the social contract that allows human civilization to exist.
And Odysseus explicitly diagnoses this. He observes that the Cyclops do not practice agriculture, they have no assembly, and they have no laws. Every Cyclops is an island unto himself, ruling his own cave, completely indifferent to his neighbors.
They're like radical libertarians.
They are radical, hyper-violent libertarians existing completely outside the matrix of community. Because they have no community, they have no collective defense. That is their fatal vulnerability.
which allows Odysseus to dismantle Polyphemus using the tools of civilization. He uses refined, highly concentrated agricultural technology, the wine, to bypass the monster's lack of cultural tolerance for alcohol. He uses physical technology by hardening the olive wood stake in the fire. But the real masterstroke is linguistic.
The famous nobody trick.
Yes, the nobody trick. When Polyphemus asks his name earlier, Odysseus says, "My name is nobody." So when he drives the burning stake into the giant's eye, Polyphemus screams for his neighbors. The other Cyclops gather outside the boulder, blocking the cave, and yell, "Polyphemus, is someone killing you?" And he screams back, "Nobody's killing me." So they just shrug and walk away.
It's hilarious, really.
But the nuance of this in the original Greek is completely lost in translation, isn't it?
Oh, entirely. It is arguably the greatest linguistic pun in ancient literature.
Really? Break it down for us.
So, in ancient Greek, Odysseus tells the Cyclops his name is Odyssey, which translates to nobody. However, when the neighboring Cyclops respond, the grammatical structure of their conditional sentence, "if nobody is hurting you," forces them to use a different negative particle. They say metis.
And metis means?
Metis means cunning, craft, or intellectual trickery.
No way.
Yes, it is the very defining characteristic of Odysseus. So, on a literal level, the neighbors are saying, if nobody's hurting you, it must be a disease from Zeus. But on a metatextual level, they are loudly declaring, cunning is destroying you, and brute force can do nothing to stop it.
That is mind-blowing.
It is the absolute triumph of the intellect over raw mass.
A flawless victory. But then he completely self-sabotages.
It really does.
As they are rowing away from the island, the blinded Cyclops is hurling tops of mountains into the sea, trying to swamp the ship. Odysseus is safe. But his ego, his need for Cleo's glory and recognition, completely overrides his intellect. He can't bear the thought that this monster will sit in his cave thinking he was bested by a guy named Nobody. So he stands up on the deck and screams, "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, sacker of cities, son of Laertes, who lives in Ithaca."
And in doing so, he hands his enemy the exact GPS coordinates for divine retribution.
It's so dumb.
It is. Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon. He immediately prays to his father, using Odysseus' full name and address, cursing him to either never return home or to arrive late, broken, in a stranger's ship, to find chaos in his household.
It's such a frustrating moment as a reader.
But a necessary one for his character arc. It demonstrates the tension between the old paradigm of heroic glory and the new paradigm of survival. Odysseus has the intellect of a modern man, but he is still dragging the ego of an Iliad-era warlord. He has to learn, through brutal punishment, that his name and his ego are actually liabilities.
And that punishment comes swiftly, driving them further into the bizarre, magical periphery of the world. They land on Aea, the island of the witch goddess Circe. She invites an exploration party of his men into her palatial home, feeds them a potion laced with honey and Pramnian wine, and strikes them with her wand, literally transforming them into swine. Complete physical and psychological degradation.
It's a terrifying manifestation of the threat of the feminine unknown in the Greek psyche. Specifically, it's the fear of losing one's rationality to bodily appetites. But the most important element of this episode isn't the magic itself, it's how Odysseus defeats it. Hermes intercepts him on the way to Circe's house and gives him a protective herb with a black root and a milk-white flower called moly.
And Homer makes a very specific linguistic choice when describing how Hermes explains this plant, right?
Yes. Homer says Hermes explained the physis of the plant. This is the first recorded use of the word physis in Western literature. It is the etymological root of our word physics and nature.
Wait, so in the middle of a story about witches and monsters, we get the invention of the concept of objective physical reality.
Well, I should clarify. It's the dawn of a scientific framework pushing back against mythological fabulism. The concept of physis implies that the universe isn't just a chaotic playground for arbitrary magical forces. Things possess an inherent, immutable physical nature that can be understood and utilized by human beings.
So it's an antidote.
Yes. Armed with the objective reality of the moly plant, Odysseus' biology is shielded from Circe's magic. He draws his sword, forces her to swear an oath not to unman him, and then, ever the pragmatist, takes her to bed and stays on the island for a year to recuperate.
Taking one for the team, as always.
But
But eventually, the crew snaps him out of his complacency. They demand to go home. Circe agrees to let them go, but she delivers a terrifying prerequisite. She says, "You cannot sail home yet. First, you must sail to the edge of the ocean, dig a trench, sacrifice black sheep, and perform a catabasis, a descent into the underworld, to consult the blind, dead prophet Tiresias."
The underworld sequence, or the Nekia, is the philosophical fulcrum of the entire epic. It is Homer actively engaging in a dialogue with his own prior masterpiece, the Iliad. Odysseus sits by this trench of sacrificial blood, fending off the gibbering shades of the dead, waiting for Tiresias. But before the prophet arrives, Odysseus experiences a procession of famous women, the mothers and wives who birthed the great heroes and lineages of Greek myth.
That always struck me as odd. I mean, in a deeply patriarchal society, why dedicate so much narrative real estate to cataloging these women?
Because the Odyssey is fundamentally reevaluating what sustains a civilization. The Iliad is obsessed with the spear point, the individual male achieving a blazing, short-lived glory. But by centering these women in the underworld, the poem is acknowledging that biological continuation, the weaving of family lines, and the quiet maintenance of the household are the actual foundations of permanence. The women are the architects of the continuum.
That reevaluation becomes completely explicit when Odysseus finally meets the ghost of Achilles down there. Achilles is the poster child for the old system. In the Iliad, he had a prophesied choice. Stay home in Phthia, live a long, comfortable, unremarkable life and die a forgotten old man, or go to Troy, die in your 20s, and achieve Kleos Athaton undying eternal glory.
And he chose the glory.
He chose the glory. So Odysseus sees him in the underworld, striding through the fields of Asphodel, and says, Achilles, you must be the happiest man in the universe. You are revered as a god down here. You won the game. And Achilles delivers a response that completely annihilates the warrior ethos.
It really does. I will paraphrase, but Achilles essentially says, do not try to sell me on the merits of death, Odysseus. I would rather be bound to the soil as a living slave, working for a poor, landless farmer, than be the undisputed king of all the bloodless dead.
It is the ultimate buyer's remorse.
Total regret.
He looks at his eternal Wikipedia page, sees he is the most famous killer in human history, and realizes it is utterly hollow. He would trade every song ever sung about him just to feel the sun on his face and breathe actual air. It shatters the toxic, death-obsessed hustle culture of the Bronze Age elite.
It represents a massive paradigm shift in Western thought. The epic is arguing that survival nostos, the return to your family and your responsibilities, is a superior form of heroism to dying for abstract honor. Achilles realizes too late that true permanence isn't about strangers singing your name, it's about your living legacy. The very next question Achilles asks Odysseus is, have you heard any news of my son? Did he fight bravely? He cares about the biological continuum.
And Odysseus is going to need every ounce of that commitment to survival, because the very next obstacle he faces after leaving the underworld is the sirens. Now, popular culture has completely butchered the sirens. We imagine them as these incredibly seductive mermaids, luring sailors to their deaths with promises of physical, sexual pleasure. But if you look at the text, that isn't what they offer at all.
No, they don't offer sex. They offer data.
Yeah.
They offer absolute, infinite information.
Odysseus has his men plug their ears with beeswax so they can keep rowing, but he instructs them to tie him tightly to the ship's mast so he can safely listen to the song. And the sirens sing to him, "Come here, Odysseus. We know everything that happened on the plains of Troy. We know the secret motives of the gods. We know all things that come to pass on the fertile earth." For a man defined by his intellect, his curiosity, and his desire to understand the world, that is a far more lethal trap than any physical temptation.
And the visual Homer paints is just horrifying. The sirens are sitting in a meadow, and all around them are the rotting, putrefying corpses of sailors. The implication is that these men weren't violently murdered. They simply pulled their ships up to the beach, sat down to listen to the infinite stream of fascinating information, and starved to death because they could not bring themselves to leave.
I want to talk directly to you, the listener, for a second. How many times have you clicked on a thread about global geopolitical maneuvering or a deep dive into macroeconomic trends, or even just some intricate celebrity drama, telling yourself you are simply getting informed? You keep scrolling, consuming more and more high-fidelity data, but you aren't actually doing anything with it. You are just sitting on the island of the sirens, letting your actual physical life, your relationships, your responsibilities, your goals rot away while you consume a feed of infinite omniscience. It is the ancient blueprint for the modern doom scroll.
It is an alarmingly accurate parallel. The classical Greek philosophical tradition viewed untethered curiosity without a specific actionable telos, or end goal, as a vice, not a virtue.
Really? A vice?
Yes. If you are gathering information purely for the sake of consumption, you are paralyzing yourself. Modern algorithmic feeds operate exactly like the sirens. They exploit our evolutionary drive to gather data about our environment, but they provide it in such overwhelming, conflicting volumes that we suffer from optimization fatigue. We become apathetic, frozen on the beach. Odysseus only survives because he bound himself to the mast. He applied a hard physical constraint on his own capacity to act on that destructive curiosity.
Wow. So he survives the information overload. He barely survives the physical terrors of the sea monsters, Scylla and Charybdis, but his crew finally seals their own doom. Despite strict warnings, they slaughter and eat the sacred cattle of Helios, the sun god, while Odysseus is sleeping. The gods obliterate the ship with a lightning bolt. Everyone drowns except Odysseus, who drifts for 9 days until he washes up on Calypso's island. And we have finally caught up to the present timeline of the story.
Exactly. And having heard this massive traumatic confession, the Phaeacians realize they are in the presence of a living legend. They load him up with unimaginable treasure and finally provide the logistical means to get him back to Ithaca. But the mechanics of this journey are crucial. Once on the ship, Odysseus falls into a supernatural, death-like sleep. The Phaeacians sail him to Ithaca, carry his sleeping body off the boat, lay him on the sand with his treasure, and silently depart.
It is the ancient equivalent of fast traveling in a video game. You hit a loading screen and just wake up at your destination. Why does Homer write it this way? Why not have him heroically navigate the ship into the harbor?
Because he is crossing a metaphysical boundary. The world of the Phaeacians, Circe, and the Cyclops is the realm of myth, magic, and gods. Ithaca is the realm of gritty, political, human reality. The deep sleep acts as a psychological airlock. He is shedding the skin of the mythic wanderer and waking up to the grim reality of a broken domestic state.
And it is a terrifying reality. If he just struts up to his palace and announces, "I'm back," the 108 suitors will instantly butcher him. He would suffer the exact fate of Agamemnon. He needs a strategy. Athena appears, shrouds him in mist, and physically transforms him. She withers his skin, dims his eyes, thins his hair, and dresses him in filthy, smoke-stained rags.
Yeah.
He infiltrates his own kingdom disguised as a beggar.
This is the ultimate test of his core attribute, polyeklis, endurance. He has to weaponize humility. He goes to his own manor, walks among the men who are eating his livestock and trying to steal his wife, and begs them for crusts of bread. He has to run reconnaissance on his own household to see who is loyal and who has turned traitor.
And the abuse he takes is staggering. Antinous, the most arrogant and vicious of the suitors, gets annoyed by the beggar's presence, picks up a solid wooden footstool, and hurls it as hard as he can, striking Odysseus square in the back. Now this is the man who sacked Troy, the man who blinded a giant. The instinct to draw blood must have been overwhelming.
An Iliad-era hero would have immediately drawn a sword to defend his honor, and he would have been slaughtered by the sheer numbers in the room. But Odysseus simply takes the blow. He stands firm as a rock, shakes his head in silence, and walks away. Later that night, he lies awake in the dark, watching his own female servants sneaking out of the house to sleep with the suitors, laughing and giggling. His heart is literally described as barking like a dog defending its pups. He wants to kill them all right then and there, but he strikes himself on the chest and mutters, "Endure, my heart, you have endured worse than this." He subordinates his ego and his rage to his tactical objective.
The discipline is terrifying. And the trap is finally sprung, not just by him, but by Penelope. We have to talk about Penelope's genius here. She has been holding off these men for years, using her own form of Midas, her own craft. She told him she would choose a husband only after she finished weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus' father. She would weave it all day in front of them, and then secretly unweave it at night. But time has run out. They caught her, so she announces a final contest. She goes into the vault, retrieves Odysseus' massive, stiff recurved bow, and tells the suitors, "Whoever can string this bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through the socket holes of 12 axe heads lined up in a row, I will marry."
It is a brilliantly engineered psychological trap. Penelope intuitively understands the mechanics of mimetic rivalry that bind the suitors together. None of these men actually want to risk the humiliation of failing a physical test, but because they are trapped in a status competition with each other, they are forced to participate. And of course, none of them have the physical strength or the technical leverage required to bend the horn and string the bow. They heat it by the fire, they rub it with fat, but they all fail miserably. They are publicly exposed as inadequate frauds, unable to wield the power of the man they were trying to replace.
And then the beggar in the corner asks for a turn. The suitors are outraged and terrified that a homeless man might show them up, but Telemachus insists. Odysseus takes the bow, he inspects it for termite damage, and then, without even standing up, he strings it effortlessly. Homer compares the motion to a master musician stringing a lyre. He plucks the string, and it sings like a swallow. He notches the arrow, fires it flawlessly through all 12 axe heads, and turns to his son. The disguise vanishes. Telemachus and 2 loyal herdsmen have already locked the great doors of the hall and removed all the spears and shields from the walls.
The reckoning has arrived, and the choice of weapon is highly significant. In the aristocratic warfare of the Iliad, the bow is often looked down upon as a cowardly trickster's weapon because it allows you to kill from a distance, avoiding face-to-face risk. But in the Odyssey, the bow is recontextualized as the instrument of precise divine justice. Restoring the order of the oikos isn't about performative honor, it's about efficient, ruthless execution.
And it is ruthless. He shoots Antinous straight through the throat, just as the man is lifting a golden goblet of Odysseus's wine to his lips. What follows is an absolute slaughter. They massacre all 108 men. The floors are ankle-deep in blood and gore. And then Odysseus turns his attention to the disloyal servants. He forces the maids who slept with the suitors to haul out the corpses and scrub the blood off the furniture with sponges. Once the hall is clean, he has Telemachus take them outside and hang them all from a single rope in the courtyard. He even mutilates and kills the servant who tried to arm the suitors. Looking at this through a modern lens, it feels less like a triumph of justice and more like the end of a Tarantino movie. Is Homer actually okay with this level of industrial violence?
It is a difficult pill for modern sensibilities to swallow, but within the moral architecture of Homer's world, yes, it is absolutely justified. The suitors committed the highest societal crimes. They sought to destroy a household, they plotted to murder an heir, and they violated the sacred protection of Denia. Down in the underworld, the ghost of Agamemnon actually receives the souls of the dead suitors. When he hears how they died, he doesn't pity them. He cheers. He praises Penelope's unyielding virtue and Odysseus' tactical genius, recognizing that their glory is cemented precisely because they function together as a unified, uncompromising force of order.
But the violence doesn't solve the structural problem of Ithaca. The fathers and brothers of the 108 dead suitors are furious. They arm themselves, form a mob, and march out to Odysseus' farm to enact blood vengeance. A massive, devastating civil war is about to erupt on the island. Odysseus and his men put on their armor, ready to fight again. And how does it resolve? Athena literally drops out of the sky, a massive deus ex machina, and screams, "Hold back from fierce fighting." She terrifies them all, forces them to drop their weapons, and dictates a binding pact of peace between Odysseus and the families.
It's one of the most abrupt endings in classical literature, and it carries a profound sociological message. The epic is acknowledging that human justice, when based purely on a cycle of blood feuds and an eye-for-an-eye mentality, is a dead end. If left to their own devices, humans will perpetually seek vengeance until society completely cannibalizes itself. The gods have to violently intervene and mandate amnesia and peace because humanity at this stage hasn't yet evolved a robust, objective legal system, like a jury trial, to stop the cycle of retribution. Order's restored, but it requires divine enforcement.
Which brings us to exactly why this specific story, with all its brutal, uncompromising pursuit of order, is experiencing a massive cultural resurgence right now. We are about to see a massive IMAX adaptation of the Odyssey, directed by Christopher Nolan. You've got Matt Damon as Odysseus, Zendaya, Tom Holland, and Travis Scott playing the bard. And leading up to this, there has been a massive debate online about how we view this character, partly sparked by Emily Wilson's modern translation. She translated the famous first word, polytropos, which we discussed means many-turned or crafty, as, "Tell me about a complicated man."
That translation choice sparked intense academic and cultural debate because words carry modern baggage. In our current cultural zeitgeist, describing a protagonist as complicated almost always implies moral ambiguity. It suggests a trauma-ridden anti-hero who operates in the gray areas, whose values are shifting, and who is fundamentally broken by their experiences.
And I think audiences are suffering from profound exhaustion with that archetype. For the last decade, every single superhero, detective, or sci-fi protagonist has to secretly be the villain, or have a dark, brooding secret, or spend 3 hours deconstructing their own toxic masculinity. It's draining. Sometimes we don't want a 5-hour psychological deconstruction of an anti-hero who hates himself. Sometimes we want a hero whose motivations are incredibly simple and pure.
I would argue that is exactly why Odysseus is resonating again. Despite the vastness of his intellect, his core objective is not morally complicated. He definitively and unapologetically stands for civilization over barbarism, order over chaos, and family over isolation. Yes, he is deeply flawed. He lets his ego blind him with the Cyclops. He falls asleep at catastrophic moments. But his North Star, the return to his wife, his son, and his estate, never wavers. In an era where we are constantly bombarded by moral relativism, infinite data feeds, and optimization fatigue, Homer offers an intellectual and spiritual reprieve. He gives us a straightforward, archetypal hero who grounds us in ancient, enduring, and frankly unyielding values.
We have covered a massive expanse of history and psychology today. We explored that miraculous cognitive leap from high-fidelity oral memory to the written word. We watched Odysseus reject the sterile, meaningless stagnation of immortality. We analyzed how he used the technological craft of Athena to dismantle the raw, unthinking force of Poseidon's universe. We saw him completely restructure the ancient idea of glory by choosing survival over early death in the underworld. We diagnosed the sirens as the original doom scroll of infinite paralyzing information. And finally, we witnessed a brutal, mathematically precise restoration of a broken home, achieved through staggering emotional endurance.
It serves as an ancient blueprint for modern endurance. It reminds us that true permanence isn't found in chasing eternal fame or drowning in endless streams of data. Permanence is found in the maintenance of order, the deliberate application of intellect against chaos, and the sheer courage required to navigate a hostile world in order to return to the responsibilities that actually matter.
So, if you are listening to this, the next time you find yourself sitting on the couch, aimlessly scrolling through infinite feeds of geopolitical panic, hot takes, and useless data, you need to stop and ask yourself, am I just sitting on the Siren's Island right now, letting my life rot away? And what is the homeland, the actual tangible goals and people in my life that I'm neglecting by sitting here? But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own as you step back into the real world. Odysseus' entire identity, his legendary polytropos, his unmatched capacity for endurance, was forged entirely in the fires of crisis, war, and desperate survival. But what happens the day after Athena forces peace on the island of Ithaca? When a man whose entire neurological architecture is perfectly adapted to outsmart monsters, lead armies, and endure unimaginable suffering wakes up to a quiet house, a peaceful farm, and absolutely no external threats, does he even know how to be normal? Or does the ultimate problem solver, terrified of the silence, inevitably start looking for a new war to fight?